Hi, this is Winner, and welcome to Winscope Podcast. Hi everyone. After being away for quite some time, I am now back with a topic that I think working adults can really relate to. And this thing that I want to talk about in this episode is something that has been part of my working life for as long as I can remember. And that thing is called work anxiety. Now, let's try to break down the term a little bit. Okay, so I think many people are already familiar with the term anxiety, right? So, anxiety is when you have this chronic feeling of nervousness. It's a feeling that lasts over a period of time instead of something short term like fear. So, it's like a constant state of worrying, like you're always worried about something. Now, in life, we worry about many different things, and we all have our own particular fears, which is why we have many kinds of anxiety. But to me, work anxiety is really one of the worst kinds of anxiety that you could have. Because if you think about it, most of the time in our lives, and I think this applies to most people, are spent working, right? Monday to Friday. Some people even also include Saturday, 9 to 5, 250, 260 something days per year. So, if you have work anxiety, you're basically anxious about something that takes up like 70 or 80% of your life. Something that make up a considerable part of who you are. Now, I went online to try to find out like more of the formal or official description of what work anxiety is, and this is what I found. So, work anxiety is a chronic anxiety caused by the workplace. And this is from WebMD, where some of the following symptoms could include constant worrying, feeling irritable, tired, or tense, having trouble sleeping, and crying. Now, it sounds like a terrible thing to have, but I also have work anxiety. In fact, I personally believe that most people have work anxiety, but the degree that each person has it and how much it actually affects our lives are different, right? Because it depends on the condition at the workplace and especially how well the person manages work anxiety. However, I believe that work anxiety is usually at its peak during job transitions, which means that whenever you are changing your job title, your role in the workplace, or when you change organization, this is usually when it's at its worst. And I say this based on experience as well, because my worst case of work anxiety always happens right after a big change that has happened in my career. So it happens right from the moment where I finished university and started getting into my first job. It always happens like at its peak each time that I get promoted. And the worst one so far is the one that I have been experiencing in the past 1 year, when I moved from Thailand to Singapore, changing from an engineering manager at a site to a regional process safety manager covering the whole region of Asia Pacific. And I have learned that work anxiety is very much best friends with imposter syndrome. Now that is probably a topic for another episode, but those are the worst combinations that you could have at the workplace. Weekends are something that flies by very quickly for me. I dread going back to work, on Mondays, and in many occasions, everything just looks like a challenge, like I had no idea what I was doing. So I was covering the whole of Asia Pacific. I didn't know the key people that I had to work with. Actually, even today, I don't 100% know everybody. I was still figuring out the organization, who does what, who reports to who are the people in the office, with being relocated from Thailand to Singapore. I was even still figuring out what I should be doing actually in my new role. But the expectations of the role has always been there. So I had to try my best to do my job, but at the same time spending enough time learning to figure things out. So it was like for me, it was as if I was multitasking all the time, and it was very difficult to focus and prioritize. And my boss at the time was also sitting in Europe. So any discussions, any advice that I want to get from him, I would have to wait for at least around 3 p.m. and onwards. And not to mention, I'm also quite young compared to my peers. So being around this age in the workplace, I'm always, constantly putting pressure on myself and constantly worrying about what people might think of me, what they might think of my performance. Now, I could go on and on to tell you about how difficult things have been, but this episode is not meant for that. In fact, it's been more than a year now, and I can honestly say that things have gotten so much better. So, I'm here to talk about the things that I did to make things better, but also some things that I did that actually made things worse, so that, you don't have to make the same mistakes that I did. Okay? So, one of the very first things that I did that really kickstarted the whole thing of, things looking much better is to accept where I was and that I was not good enough, right? But that I could learn to become better. Now, this is something that at the time was kind of something that's completely new to me because, believe it or not, being promoted or hired into a position doesn't automatically make you an expert or good at your job. In fact, most likely, maybe you were chosen because people saw something in you, some kind of potential that you will do well, or that you will learn to do well based on your past experience and or aptitude. Now, accepting that requires being honest to yourself, which requires being vulnerable. But vulnerability or, being truthful to yourself is not the same as making up excuses. So that means, you don't whine, you don't complain. You try to be truthful to yourself just to pinpoint what you need to develop, what you need to work on. And when I was able to accept that about myself, that, okay, I was not good enough yet, but I can learn to become better, I was really able to focus on moving forward on the things that I need to work on instead of being stuck in this defensive mode and trying to provide myself reasons why I'm okay or trying to get people to give me reasons why I'm okay. So that was the first thing, is to accept. The second thing is to seek mentorship, or to seek for help, for advice, for support. So it's always a good idea to ask for support from your boss and also your peers, especially those who are, a bit more senior and more experienced. So my boss, as well as my colleagues, are have always been very supportive. Now, you don't have to go through it alone, right? Because the only thing that I had to do was first to figure out what I need help with. Otherwise, they wouldn't realize how they could help you. This doesn't mean that you don't have to put in the work, because when you do ask for support or advice, you don't just write out, go and ask for an answer. So the right approach that I think is the right one is to always put in the work first. Try your best to figure out what you need to do, and then just using their support or advice as some kind of cross check, to check your logic or your work and see what you may have missed, what you could improve, what you didn't consider. But having said that, you have to keep in mind that at the end of the day, you need to take responsibility for your own decisions. So over time, you will need to learn more and more to make your own decisions and actions. Now, the third thing is don't run from challenges. Now, this is actually quite difficult because this is something that you may not be consciously aware of. I say that because I'm guilty of that myself, because when you're afraid of something, making mistakes or people discovering that you're learning, afraid of what people might think that you're stupid, subconsciously, you end up making unconscious decisions to steer away from challenges, to delay things, to avoid things that you're unfamiliar with, things that you may have no idea yet how to do. So you take less risks, you become more safe. And what happens is that you're also at the same time robbing yourself of learning opportunities. And before you know it, time will go by without you really learning anything, and you will be stuck exactly where you were months or years ago when you first took the job. So the strategy of fake it till you make it is not something that it cannot be the only thing that you rely on. Because by then, if you just avoid things, if you just delay things, then the only person that you can fool is really yourself. So the goal here is to learn and become smarter tomorrow than you are today, which brings me to the final point. Accept making mistakes. Okay, it's okay to make mistakes. You're not going to go through this unharmed. You're not going to go through this in the best shape, right? So you'll make mistakes, you'll look stupid, you'll get criticized, you'll get commented, but spoiler alert, you're going to be okay. It's all going to be fine. It's part of the process when you learn, right? It's not always going to go well, but this is something that always keeps me going. So I always think that a regret for your actions is always better than a regret from inactions. So as long as you learn from every experience and you truly demonstrate that you're trying to do your job and that you don't make the same mistakes twice, people will come to respect that about you, whether you're doing well yet or not, but that at least you are on your way to becoming better. And another thing is we all tend to think others, pay attention to us more than they actually do anyway. So it's called the spotlight effect. So nobody really cares. Nobody cares as much as you think they do. So just go on, make mistakes. It's part of the process. You need to tackle it. Otherwise, you will never unlock what it is that you need to figure out, what it is that you need to learn, and to actually become better. So, those are the things that help me manage work anxiety so far. So, notice I say manage because work anxiety is something that will always be there, but at least it doesn't keep me up at night. Mondays are not as bad as they used to be. I am seeing improvements. I'm seeing myself get better. I am also becoming proud of my work. So, as long as I keep all those things that I mentioned up, work anxiety is something that can be managed and turn into a trigger to, for myself to take necessary actions. So, that's it for today's episode. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll talk to you again in the next one.